Please, I'll clean anything. I just need food. Those were the first trembling words Mr. Langston heard as he opened the massive, carved oak doors of his gated Beverly Hills mansion. It was nearly sundown, the golden California light casting long shadows across the marble front steps. He had been expecting a delivery, maybe wine, or another package from Europe, but what stood before him was neither. It was a girl, no older than 19 or 20. Her oversized hoodie hung loose over a bony frame. Her jeans were torn at the knees. No shoes, just cracked, dirty feet pressed against polished stone. Her tangled hair stuck to her face in the heat. But what caught his attention weren't her clothes, or even her desperate tone. It was her eyes. Hazel, wide, familiar in a way that unsettled him. He blinked. "What did you say?" he asked, more cautious than curious. "I'm not asking for money," she said quickly, her hands raised as if to prove she wasn't a threat. "I just need food. Anything. Bread, leftovers. I can clean your porch, sweep the floors, scrub your bathrooms. I'll work for it, I promise." Langston nearly closed the door on instinct. Not out of cruelty, but habit. Wealth had trained him to say no, especially to the desperate. He had been approached before, usually downtown, but never here, never on his doorstep. But something about this girl made his hand pause on the doorknob. There was no fear in her voice, just exhaustion. No fakeness in her eyes, just hunger. But most of all, something in her face twisted something deep in his chest. A buried recognition. A whisper from the past. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping forward. "My name's Kayla," she said softly. "I don't have family. I don't have anything, really. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Langston hesitated. He was a man known for logic, deals, and data. Billionaire tech developer. Harvard sharp. CEO of one of the most powerful companies on the West Coast. But in that moment, all the logic in the world couldn't quiet what his gut was screaming. There's more to this girl than meets the eye. Still, he had to be careful. "Where are you staying?" he asked, scanning the quiet street behind her. "Are there others with you?" She shook her head. "I sleep behind the hardware store on 3rd. Sometimes in the alley behind the diner. I don't have a phone, if that's what you're thinking." Langston studied her again. If she was lying, she was doing a damn good job. But if she was telling the truth, then how did she get past security? Past the cameras? Past the gates? The intercom hadn't rung. The guards hadn't alerted him. "How'd you get in here?" he asked, suspicious now. She looked confused. "I walked in through the side road. The back gate was open." Back gate. Langston frowned. That gate hadn't been opened in years. His late wife used to walk through it to visit the rose garden. After she passed, it had been locked permanently. He made sure of it. Unless someone had opened it from the inside. "You're saying the gate was just open?" he asked again. She nodded. "Why this house?" She lowered her eyes. "I don't know. It just felt familiar." He stared. That word, familiar. It sent a chill down his spine. Something told him this wasn't a random act of hunger. She hadn't chosen this house by accident. And yet, she stood there, shaking. Her lips cracked. Her stomach growled so loud it echoed off the columns. He could slam the door and go back to his imported wine and steak dinner. Or, "Come in," he said finally. The word surprised even him. Kayla's eyes widened. "Really? I don't make offers twice," he muttered, stepping aside. She stepped in slowly, cautiously, as though the marble floors might collapse beneath her. The scent of lemon polish and soft classical music filled the foyer. Her eyes darted everywhere. At the chandelier, at the grand staircase, at the photo on the wall of a woman holding a baby. Langston noticed. She stared at that photo a second too long. He noticed everything. And in that moment, he had a strange, haunting feeling. This wasn't just a hungry girl at his door. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Mr. Langston watched from the edge of the living room, arms crossed, as the girl moved silently through the house. Kayla didn't fumble or hesitate. She didn't ask where anything was. She headed straight to the hall closet, pulled out the exact bottle of lemon polish his housekeeper used, grabbed a cloth from the drawer beneath it, without needing directions, and started wiping the banister, one careful stroke at a time. Not like someone improvising. Not like someone desperate for work. Like someone who had been there before. Langston narrowed his eyes, intrigued and slightly alarmed. His house was massive, 6 bedrooms, 4 lounges, and ceilings that kissed the clouds. Most people needed a map just to find the guest bathroom. But this girl, she walked like she belonged. After dusting the stairs, She moved to the grand piano and began wiping the keys. Carefully, respectfully, like it mattered. Most cleaning girls would just skip it. But Kayla didn't. "You play?" he asked from the corner. She glanced up, startled. "No, but someone I used to know did." He didn't press, but his eyes stayed fixed on her face. Then came the moment that froze the air. Kayla stepped toward the fireplace mantel. On it sat a large silver-framed photo of a smiling woman holding a toddler on her lap. Langston's late wife, Alina. The girl picked it up, gently, like a sacred object. Her fingers traced the glass slowly. "That's your wife?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Langston nodded. "Yes, Alina. She passed away 16 years ago." Kayla's breath hitched. She didn't blink. She stared at the woman in the photo like she recognized her. Not from Google. Not from articles or tabloids. From memory. Langston felt his stomach twist. Kayla finally set the photo down, but not before her fingers lingered just a second too long. Then, trying to act normal, she turned and walked back toward the kitchen. He followed. There, she had already filled the sink and started washing dishes like she'd done it 1,000 times. Scrub, rinse, dry, stack. She even opened the right cabinet to put them away. His brow furrowed. "How do you know where that goes?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She froze. "I just guessed," she said. "Lucky guess." He didn't believe her, but he didn't call her out. Instead, he watched her hands too graceful for a life on the streets. She washed with rhythm, not just routine, with muscle memory. That was the part that unsettled him. Something inside him whispered, "This isn't her first time here." But how could that be? He'd lived alone for years. No family since Alina's death. No children. At least, not anymore. His throat tightened. Could it be? No, that was impossible. He had lost his daughter the night she was born. Premature. The hospital said she didn't survive. His wife had crumbled in grief, and he had buried the pain deep beneath work, routine, and silence. But Kayla, her eyes, her cheekbones, that left dimple when she smiled faintly. She looked just like Alina. "Do I know you?" he asked finally, his voice low, guarded. Kayla froze, her hands submerged in soapy water. She didn't look at him. Then, just as quickly, she picked up a plate and scrubbed harder. "I'm done with the dishes. Do you need the upstairs cleaned too?" she asked, trying to redirect. Langston didn't answer right away. He studied her face again, searching for clues, for cracks. She wouldn't meet his eyes. After a long pause, he finally nodded. "Yeah, the upstairs guest rooms. Start there." She dried her hands and left the room without another word. But the silence left behind was deafening. Langston stood alone in the kitchen, the faint scent of soap and lemon polish lingering. He stared out the window, remembering something his wife once said, years ago, holding their newborn daughter. "You'll know her. No matter what happens, you'll know her face." He swallowed hard, because now, he wasn't sure if he'd just let a stranger clean his home, or if his past had just walked back in through the front door. That night, the house was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fireplace in the study where Mr. Langston sat alone. The weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders, and he found himself drawn back to an old leather-bound photo album that rested on his desk. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the yellowed pages until he reached a picture that had haunted him for years. There, in faded colors, was his wife, Alina, smiling tenderly as she cradled a tiny newborn baby girl. The baby's fragile face was almost hidden beneath a soft pink blanket, but to Langston, every detail was etched forever in his mind. He remembered that day like a distant dream, the joy, the hope, the sudden heartbreak. Their daughter was born premature, barely clinging to life. The hospital had warned them it would be touch and go. But then the devastating news came. The doctors said she hadn't survived. The moment shattered their world. Langston had begged the hospital staff to let him see his daughter, to hold her just once. But they refused. No photograph, no body, no farewell. Only a tiny folded blanket, the only thing Alina was allowed to keep. He recalled the days after, watching his wife cry quietly in their bedroom, her sobs muffled but endless. She never spoke about their daughter again. Neither did he. He buried the pain, turning his grief into work, trying to forget the questions that haunted him. But tonight was different. Tonight, a stranger had come to his door, a girl who moved through his home as though she had lived there before. The way she glanced at the photo on the mantel, The way her hazel eyes flickered with recognition. The same left dimple when she smiled faintly. Langston's heart pounded. Could this girl be the daughter he lost? Could she really be Kayla? The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. He closed the album slowly and stood, his mind racing. With heavy steps, he climbed the grand staircase to the guest room where Kayla was resting. He knocked softly on the door. Kayla, can I ask you something personal? Inside, Kayla stirred and sat up, her eyes wide with surprise. Yes, she said, her voice tired but alert. Langston hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Do you know who your parents are? She bit her lip, folding her hands in her lap. I grew up in foster homes, she admitted quietly. They told me I was left at a hospital as a baby. No name, no one to claim me. Just a little birth blanket. Her words hit him like a blow. He stepped back, his breath catching as if he'd seen a ghost. Which hospital? He asked softly. She looked up and named the hospital. The very same one where his daughter had been born 16 years ago. The room grew still. Langston closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his shaking hands. Everything was adding up in a way that made no sense, and yet felt undeniably true. Did you ever try to find your family? He asked gently. Kayla shook her head. I didn't know where to start. I thought I was alone in the world, like I didn't belong anywhere. Langston swallowed the lump in his throat. Her words echoed the same loneliness he had felt after losing his daughter, the same aching void that had haunted him for years. Now, the mystery was unraveling before him. Who had taken Kayla away? Why had she been hidden? Why had no one told him the truth? For the first time since Alina's death, hope flickered inside Langston's chest. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down carefully, looking her in the eyes. There's a lot we don't understand yet, he said softly, but I promise you this. I will find out everything. I will find your story. Kayla's eyes glistened with tears. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to look beyond her rough exterior, beyond the lost girl in front of him. Someone was ready to bring her home. Langston thought about his wife, the tiny blanket folded in the photo, and the years of silence filled with unanswered questions. Maybe fate had brought Kayla back to him for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with truth, healing, and family. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but inside Mr. Langston's mind, a storm was brewing. He barely slept that night, thoughts racing in circles, questions spinning with no answers yet. The hope he'd felt yesterday was quickly mingling with fear. What if he was wrong? What if this was just a coincidence? But he had to know. He couldn't live in uncertainty any longer. Without telling Kayla the full truth, Langston picked up the phone and called a discreet, private DNA testing lab known for handling sensitive cases. He explained the situation in vague terms, that it was just for peace of mind. When he told Kayla about the test, she looked confused but curious. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of hope, maybe, or just the desperate desire for any clue about her past. Okay, she said quietly. If it will give us answers, I want to know too. Days dragged on like an eternity. Langston barely left his study, endlessly refreshing his email, pacing the long halls of his mansion. Every sound made his heart jump. Then, finally, the message arrived. He opened the encrypted attachment and read the report with shaking hands. 99.9999% match. The words burned into his mind. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. It was proof. Kayla was his daughter. The daughter he had been told was dead. The daughter he had mourned in silence for 16 years. Langston dropped the paper onto the desk, the edges trembling in his grasp. His breath hitched, and his hands shook uncontrollably. This was no longer a theory or a vague feeling. It was undeniable truth. He ran out of the study, his legs carrying him as fast as they could toward the back garden where Kayla was watering the flower beds. She looked up, startled by his sudden appearance. Her dirt-smudged face broke into a curious smile. I need to show you something, Langston said, voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and hope. Inside the house, he handed her the DNA report. Kayla's eyes scanned the paper slowly, trying to comprehend the dense medical jargon and numbers. Finally, she looked up, her face paling. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That can't be. You're my daughter, he said softly, the words catching in his throat. I'm your father. Her breath hitched, tears welling up in her eyes. They lied to us, Langston continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They told me you died, but someone took you, hid you. And all these years you were right here." Kayla's tears spilled freely now, and she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions: grief, relief, anger, and finally, an aching sense of belonging. "I thought I didn't belong anywhere," she sobbed. "I never understood why I felt so out of place. Why I was always searching for something I couldn't name." Langston knelt beside her and pulled her into a tight embrace. The first time he had held her since the moment she was born, and the first time she had felt the touch of her father. They stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other, healing wounds that had been hidden for years. For Langston, it was a moment of reckoning, a painful but beautiful new beginning. He vowed silently to uncover the truth behind the lie that had torn their family apart. And Kayla, for the first time in her life, knew she was home. The news broke like wildfire. Billionaire reunites with long-lost daughter who asked to clean for food. It was plastered across news channels, morning shows, and social media feeds. Everyone wanted the story: how a homeless girl with nothing but a ragged hoodie and empty stomach turned out to be the missing daughter of one of the most powerful men in America. But to Kayla and Mr. Langston, the cameras didn't matter. What mattered was what came after. For the first time in 16 years, the mansion wasn't just a cold fortress of marble and silence. It became a home. A living, breathing place full of laughter, awkward breakfasts, late-night talks, and healing. Kayla didn't move in as a guest. She moved in as family. And she didn't just accept her new life, she used it. Every spare bedroom she once walked past as a cleaner, she now saw as something more. A space for someone like her. Someone lost. Someone abandoned. She pitched an idea to her father at breakfast one morning. "What if we turned the guest wing into transitional housing?" she asked, sipping her tea. Langston paused mid-bite. "Transitional housing? For girls aging out of foster care," she said. "Girls like me. Girls who don't have a place to go when they turn 18. We could give them a safe space. A second chance." He stared at her for a moment, stunned, then nodded slowly, his voice cracking a little. "Let's do it." Within weeks, the guest rooms were transformed. Warm lighting replaced the cold chandeliers. Plush beds, desks, bookshelves. Each room had a name, not a number, and a story. Kayla personally decorated each one. And when the first young women moved in, Kayla greeted them at the door, not as a benefactor, but as a sister who understood. One night, as she gave a tour to the first group of girls, one of them, barely 18, looked at her and whispered, "Are you really his daughter?" Kayla smiled. By blood, and now by choice. Meanwhile, Langston didn't just write checks. He showed up. He began hosting Sunday dinners with all the girls. He listened to their stories, shared his own, and sat beside them at the long dining table that had once only served foreign dignitaries and investors. Now, it served something far more valuable: hope. And as for Kayla, the transformation was stunning. The haunted look in her eyes faded. She stood taller, spoke louder, smiled more. She enrolled in college part-time, studying social work. She wanted to be more than a survivor. She wanted to be someone who changed the system. And then came the press conference. The mansion's grand entrance was swarming with reporters, cameras clicking, microphones shoved forward. She had been reluctant to go public, but Langston told her gently, "You don't have to share your story, but if you do, you'll be giving voice to so many who can't." She thought about it, then agreed. Wearing a simple dress, no makeup, and with her father by her side, Kayla stepped out onto the same marble steps where she had once stood barefoot, begging for food. Now, she faced the cameras with a calm strength that made the world pause. "I don't need food anymore," she said clearly, her voice echoing through the microphones. "I found something more important. I found where I belong." Tears filled her father's eyes. And in that moment, every headline, every share, every viral post faded in comparison to the truth they now lived. That family isn't just blood, it's healing, truth, and choosing to never let go again. The girl who once knocked on a stranger's door for a sandwich had found a home, a purpose, and a future worth more than any fortune.